Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you're coming from. This is ITPro Talk, and this is going to be How to IT. So we brought along with us from our other show, Mr. Devlin, Dev. How you doing today, Dev?
I'm doing good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. So we're going to try to do a really quick recording here to give some people some insight into Microsoft licensing. And there's a driver behind this. So, this is that time of the year where organizations, start budgeting for the next year, 22, if their fiscal year ends at the, end of the calendar year. So we have a lot of conversations a lot of the times this time of the year about licensing. So I wanted to kind of give a little bit of a primer into licensing. So we're going to do a quick overview. What we're going to talk to today is more how to IT. It's not necessarily opinion. It's just socializing some information. And I'm going to put a big asterisk here right now. There is a lot of nuance that goes into licensing from all different types of vendors. So I just kind of want to call out that you're going to want to definitely check with your vendor or your supplier of your licensing to see if the pricing model matches yours, even from the same product. So one company might have a different agreement with, say, we'll talk to Microsoft licensing here. Might have one agreement type as opposed to another type. So your licensing pricing may be different based upon different variables. So I want to put that big disclaimer out there. Check with a professional. You can always check with us at our day jobs. We can help you walk through licensing easily through what that looks like and what that means. Also, I'm going to put up on screen here this particular URL. This is just kind of a guide again that kind of gives you an idea about the different types of licensing. Microsoft.com// licensing. That'll get you to, we'll also put it in show notes. That'll get you to some general areas. We always also say check with a second party or a Microsoft partner to get more granular data, right? So definitely check that out. And aside from talking about what people normally see from licensing, there's different models. So I'll give you the overview here. We're gonna give you the quick overview of licensing. We're gonna talk about the traditional models and pricing models. We'll talk about M365, formerly known as Office 365 licensing or pricing, I should say, Azure pricing and licensing, and some other considerations. So there's a whole bunch of information. We're not going to get to it all. So please reach out to us, and we can give you more around areas that are of interest to you. So that being told, I'm going to pop Dev up here on the screen, and there you are, my man. And love the quarter zip, and you're ready to dive in to talk about some of this stuff, right?
Yeah, I literally just sneezed before I came on camera too, so it was perfect timing.
Wonderful. So let's kind of dive super deep into this, and I'm going to toss up a whiteboard here just so we can kind of make it a little bit more interactive here. Let me grab my writing slate here. So there's different types of traditional licensing. So historically organizations have heard of something called an EA, right? So we all know that's an enterprise agreement, right? And there's a value here with enterprise agreements. Usually an organization, if they're large enough to have an EA, they know what their spend is. They have a need for big volumes of licenses usually, and so you can structure special payment terms and right size your licensing, as you do what's referred to as a true up. This is one of the more traditional models of getting licensing. So before enterprise agreements, it was always one-offs. So they try to normalize some things, right? Try to give benefits and bundling of softwares together. So, and speaking purely in a Microsoft sense here, try to bundle things together to try to make it advantageous to have an enterprise agreement. In lieu of an enterprise agreement, organizations have methods to buy software. Again, in a traditional way, there's the retail model. And then with the retail model is basically like if you were to go to CDW or Insight or Amazon at this point and like look up an Office package or Visio, or go walk physically into a Staples, Office Depot. None of these are all sponsors, by the way. You walk into one of those stores, pick a box up off the shelf. That's retail, and that's retail pricing. And what you can do from an entitlement perspective is usually a one-to-one. You buy the licensing, put it on. With enterprise agreements, you're getting a little bit more flexibility. Sometimes you'll have server software, sometimes you'll have applications. And again, this is the traditional model. I know some of the more modern people are twitching right now, so hold on, we'll get there. There is also an advantage if you need to get something, if you want to get a little bit better pricing than retail and you need some volume, but your volume is not quite that of an EA. There used to be things called open license agreements. Those were, historically one of the best values that you could do without being locked into a 3 or a 5 year deal. Though with the advent of the cloud, um, it creates more models, right? So one of the things we've seen over time, especially with EAs and Microsoft wanting to give entitlements to people to try to use the cloud when it was, we'll say, let's go in the rewind machine years ago. One of the things we found is that Microsoft tried to bundle Azure spend, saying if you commit to X amount of dollars in Azure spend, we'll give you some break on some of your other licensing. So there are again structured. It is a one company to Microsoft arrangement, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Microsoft or companies that have done that. I know we've actually been involved in some of that licensing review to determine all of that need versus what you're getting. And one of the challenges historically is that you're getting stuff that you're not leveraging because it was bundled with your EA. Now, again, this is something as an aside, some things that come with EA. Occasionally you'll order things with, through open licensing or EA that has software assurance. And this is something that we're going to talk about later. That's super important, software insurance. So if you have, traditional model or traditional licensing and you have something with software assurance on it, there is a benefit that you can leverage beyond the traditional software assurance benefits that you get. So looking through all of this whole traditional model, and again, there's other areas in which are not as prominent, but these are the main ones: open licensing, EAs with software assurance, or retail. So when you buy a product historically, the old traditional way, that's how you purchased. Now along comes cloud, and as we mentioned, the bundling of cloud, and you can buy the cloud in multiple different ways, right? So you can buy directly off of Microsoft, or you can buy through something that's called a CSP. That's a cloud solution provider. You can buy Office 365 that way, and there is a CSP model for Azure, but CSP's been historically with Office 365, which is now known as Microsoft 365. CSPs try to give a value to you by bundling other services, their services traditionally. So when we stop and we look at what a CSP can do, the CSP is not just transacting the license; they're also your point of reference for help. So that's important to know from a 365 or Azure perspective. When you have a CSP, the first person you call when you're having trouble is not Microsoft. The first line of defense is the CSP. So that becomes, it has its own inherent challenges, right? So when you have someone else, maybe they're not as deep into the things that you have deployed, or maybe there's a really one-off situation where you're not able to resolve it. So the CSP is your point to go to, and the CSP has escalation points too as well. So CSP slash MSPs in Azure have a couple different values. They try to bundle sometimes, a budgetary offering. They try to bundle in some security and a little bit of light architecture. But the one thing we've found is with CSPs and MSPs, I don't want to say they've been found wanting, but what has happened is that they don't go nearly as deep as a pure architect would go. A lot of the time, some do, some have them, and some don't. So it's just a matter of finding, I guess, the right CSP and right MSP to manage your solution. And this is the point where I just kind of jammed a whole bunch of stuff out there. So we got our traditional model, and then we got some of the newer models. We have CSPs and MSPs who are transacting cloud services on behalf of Microsoft, and then you can buy direct from Microsoft. And there's multiple models of which we can buy direct, and that's what we're going to cover next. So, Dev, I'm going to toss this out to you real quick to give your day-to-day impressions and input here on some of these models. I know for sure that you've run into some of the CSP MSP challenges too as well. And again, this is in no way disparaging organizations away from that model. It's you just need to understand that it's not the same as buying direct from Microsoft.
Yeah, and I think that, at least in my experience in my day job, that I've had inconsistent success with CSPs. Sometimes for like a different issue that, especially when there's support issues that you need to figure out and it's time sensitive, sometimes that CSP being in the way can be a hindrance to what you're trying to figure out, because you just want to go directly to Microsoft, but it won't allow you. So I've seen that definitely with Azure related projects, more so on the Azure side than the Office 365 side. And also sometimes when we talk about CSPs and MSPs, you've seen that the with depending on which organization is doing that, can maybe they don't offer the same services. Like we just had a recent project where that the CSP at the time did not offer, I think it was a certain voice service that we wanted to purchase through Microsoft 365. So we literally had to take the entire licensing model off of the CSP and go direct to Microsoft, so that way we could get the right service that we wanted, which was not a expected cost that we were trying to that we foresaw, and it elongated the project more than we wanted to. But I know those are two cases where it's been not a great thing for having a CSP in the way. But in my experience, I guess I've had more bad luck than good luck with CSPs.
Yeah, and again, we're not disparaging CSPs or MSPs.
Yeah.
We're just kind of stating some of the challenges that a lot of organizations, once they see some perceived cost savings, they're like, yes, why would we not do this? But
Yeah.
you're actually trading that cost out for something else. So just kind of want to bring that up. That being the truth be told, we're CSP. We don't transact that way just because we find that we don't want to box our customers in. We would rather them make the choice to go one way or the other. But again, not disparaging the CSP model, there is value there. There's a lot of value-driven CSPs that give a whole lot of advantage. Where I find is managed services, not necessarily the traditional managed services, but point specialty services. Like there's some MSP services specifically around security or specifically around Power BI and data. So like they're point solutions. So their team, they're like experts. That's what they do, and that's what they want to focus on. So I've seen a lot of real value driven proposals that way. Or you'll find some organizations do on demand services. That's my phrase for it. In fact, the day job, that's what we call it. But there's other organizations that do similar things where they'll have on demand services where you're driving expertise around that space, so that the client will know that they're held in good hands, right? Yeah. So
I think just to add to that with the CSPs, to make it seem like I'm bashing CSPs, but I think CSPs are definitely more beneficial for organizations that may not have like an IT team. Yep. that likes to manage it. Like for the organization that I said we had to rip the CSP out was because they didn't really have any IT people on staff to really manage it. The CSP kind of took care of that for them. Yep. So there's definitely a huge, that was a very niche case where we had to rip out the CSP. But there's definitely a lot of companies out there and stuff like that, really small companies that don't have the IT staff that those services are really valuable for. So
yeah, for sure. And it's worth noting that if you choose to do a CSP to transact your licensing for your cloud services, the thing you need to understand is what they are SLA is going to be, right? So you have to look how you operate. And like with Microsoft in the traditional model, with even all the way down to retail, you pick up a phone or put a web request in for help, you'll get somebody within the SLA time, regardless. Period. I know that certain MSPs and certain CSPs, they try to do that as the clock goes. Maybe have someone on call. I mean, they're supposed to. In fact, this is a little bit of the this is the part where consultants don't like this part of the show. I'm going to pull the curtain back and let people in on a little secret. Organizations, even really small consulting organizations that decide to be CSPs, they offload the tier one call to the people that they transact through. So in order to transact a license, you have to be, I won't bore you all the business stuff. You have to check a lot of boxes, right? And then you also have to have a supplier like, Tech Data or Ingram or one of those type of large organizations brokering that that CSP licensing. So you can actually pay as a consulting company, an extra few nickels or whatever the cost is to have them be your tier one. So your tier one person that's picking up the phone when it's really going south for your organization may not even be the company. They'll answer the phone and be like, ITP help desk, how can I help you? But they're not actually with it. For some organizations, that's great. They feel like, oh wow, we got this big giant help desk behind there, but that's tier one, right? Then tier two is you as the actual company transacting it, and then from there you need to leverage partner credits and other things to try to get help beyond that, right? So support, maybe we have an episode like this, a tech talk on how to IT around how to get support. So I'm going to parking lot that for right now, and let's kind of go back to our model and what we're talking about here from a licensing perspective. So we were looking at this as our traditional model. We have our newer model, and inside these models, we're going to start talking about this direct. So, let's scroll this up here a little bit here and get ourselves a nice new section of the board here. So, in looking at direct, there's a couple ways you can buy direct services. So you can do what is referred to as a month to month. Like let's look at M365, and I'm going to actually lean on you a little bit. I know you're probably not as prepared for this, but you're prepared because you deal with this every day, all the time. So,
yes.
So I feel confident you'll be able to answer this. So there's two ways in M365, Microsoft 365, formerly known as Office 365. There's multiple licensing types for M365, but let's talk about the two ways in which you can, or three ways in which you can pay for it, right? So if you have an EA or some sort of agreement direct with Microsoft, a lot of the times your M365 licensing could be included in that. The other thing you can look at is buying it direct out, and there's two main ways. So there's a month-to-month way, and then there's a yearly way. The yearly way is a commit, right? You're committing to these many licenses for this period of time. There's obviously an advantage to going yearly. There's a cost savings there. And one of the things that spurred this episode on is that Microsoft 365 has recently had a price increase. It's unless you're at sheer volume, we're not going to go into all the different crazy pricing tiers, but unless you're at sheer massive amounts of volume, that it is a negligible increase in price for what you get from a service perspective, especially seeing as it's been, Dev, what has it been, over 5 years since there's been an increase?
I think that from what I remember, that it's the first time there's been a price increase, period.
Well,
for
yeah,
licensing. Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely been a long time. It's definitely been a long time, at least 5 years.
Yeah, so I know it's been like they've rolled other tiers in and changed tiers.
Yeah.
Like K licensing is now a different licensing model. It's like frontline worker licensing and F license as they call it. So there's all these different models or types of licensing, and there's different ways to pay for them, right? So let's whiteboard this out here real quick. So let's go whiteboard big here, so you don't have to see me looking down at my desk. Let's go whiteboard big. All right, so there's your frontline worker licensing, right? That's your F licensing, and then there's you know what? Let's roll back. Let's go back further. let's go before the business types, right? So there's a licensing tier even before we start talking about businesses, and that's like the home licensing, right? So they have license model that's for home users. You can subscribe to the M365 platform, and you can actually get up to I think it's 5, if I'm not mistaken, in your household under the same license, under the same subscription for one price per month or per year. So if you equate to the traditional model, as you used to be able to go into the local Office Depot, Home Depot, and buy Microsoft Office Home and School Edition, this is very similar to that from a use perspective. So moving up the tier from the home or the one-off, starts your business licensing. In your business licensing, there's a license type for which is an F-style license. That's your frontline worker, and there is also a license model for your business. If my whiteboard can work, your business licensing bracket, and then you have your bracket for enterprise. Let me zoom this around here. Hold on. Then you have your bracket for enterprise. So enterprise licensing is what a lot of organizations are more familiar with, right? So you've heard, if you're in business, you don't even have to be in IT to hear this. Oh, we need to subscribe to E3 or E1 or E5. They simplified the E licenses. There's two main ones that most organizations use, and that is an E3 and then an E5. And Dev, as I'm writing this out, I'm gonna kind of task you here real quick to kind of come up with some key differences between the E3 and E5. And in business, there's an Office apps version, which means that you just get, for a low fee, you get access just to the Office apps. I believe it's like $8.25 a month. It used to be $5 a month. It went up like 2.25. So there was an Office apps. And then there was business standard. And then there was, if I can spell, premium. And there's some advantages between all these different types of licenses. Okay, this doesn't. There's a whole area on this licensing that we're not talking to, and we will talk to this briefly, but I'll touch on it right now. So there's things called add-ons to your licenses or one-offs, and we'll touch on that shortly. But you'll get an entitlement for a specific type of thing, and within each one of these categories. And if you need something more or more rich features, you have the ability to add some licensing to increase that capability in your licenses. For instance, E3 is a very standard license type, but if you decide you're using Microsoft Teams and you want to do Teams voice, there's some licensing that doesn't come with the E3 that you need to have those services. You need to have, cloud PBX license or a voice license, and you need to have a dial plan. So your licensing and your pricing for this is the sum of, for each one of your users that you want to enable this, is the license for the E3, which gives you the Office apps and Exchange and SharePoint, a bunch of features, right? Dev will talk to a couple of those. And then whatever add-ons you want to have. So if you want to have in the cloud Active Directory, you'll need to add Active Directory license. It's called a P1. If you want to have Microsoft Teams voice, you're going to need to add a voice license and a dial plan. So you'll see how these things add up in price based upon what features you want to use off the core license model you have. Sometimes some organizations, they'll want to have all the security features that are in a specific product suite, and they don't want to have to pay each individual license, so they'll get a higher tier license that includes that. Now, I'm going to put a big asterisk here before I toss it to Dev, and it's worth noting that some of the business plans actually have a really good bundle. It's a very good mix of features that you get all underneath the same heading. So if you have a business premium, you're getting all the stuff that you would get in E3 and maybe some security stuff that you get in E5. There's a whole realm of things that you get based upon your license type. And again, this is when you want to get your Microsoft partner or your consultant, or if you're lucky enough to have a TAM, if you're a big enough account, to talk through what your licensing model is and what you'd intend to use and what that cost looks like. So just to kind of show a compare and contrast, Dev, did you happen to pull up any major differences between some of these license types?
Yeah, no, I think there are so many different licensing versions. I think you encapsulated the different major categories very well. I don't think you might have mentioned frontline worker licensing as well, but that's something like it's completely own world. Um,
It is.
but no, I think with the business standard and premium, and I know you keep harping on the Microsoft 365 piece, but they still have Office 365 licensing as well. So I think one of the biggest delineations that we see sometimes, or questions that come from customers, is what's the difference between Microsoft 365 E whatever and Office 365 E whatever? Because the only difference is Office versus Microsoft verbiage. So a lot of times when you look at Microsoft 365, you get a lot more of the security features and endpoint protection features, such as advanced e-discovery. There's a whole host of
Additional
different ones.
Intune, autopilot. There's a whole list
Autopilot.
of things that you get. Yeah.
Yeah, that you normally wouldn't get with just an Office 365 E whatever license. And some with the I think with the Office 365 E5 license, you get some of the advanced e discovery pieces and things like that that focus around the data inside your tenant, but you don't get a lot of the endpoint management features like Intune, stuff like that, without going to Microsoft 365 Business Premium or E3 or E5. And there's different varying levels to it. You might get a lot of times when you step up in the numbers, you get like for example, like there's for example, like Exchange Online. Usually, if you have a lower tier licensing, there's Plan 1 versus Plan 2. Plan 2 has more features and more robust. Like you may get more storage for a mailbox or something like that. Yeah, e-discovery, the whole thing. So the higher you go up in the numbers, obviously you're paying more, but you get more features, and there's additional features on top of the services that you already use, not necessarily new features or new services. I mean,
yeah, that's worth calling out. And I do keep calling out Office formerly because that is me being the good Microsoft evangelist here, because if you ever go to their webpage for their stuff, it says formerly Office, because they want everyone to use I shouldn't say this for them, but the path is to try to use M365, because if you can use M365, you're getting some level of security, right? So the traditional Office 365 bits, aside from an E5, there was really not much other than the native things that come within Exchange Server that we're familiar with from an on-prem perspective. So it's worth calling out, though. There are tiers within these realms where organizations will see a really low price point, and I deal with this quite frequently, where an organization of a mid to a smaller size will be like, oh yeah, I want to get 365, and when I'm doing 365, I saw the prices, $15 a user a month, or $12.50 a user a month, or what have you, and it's worth noting, like, okay, that might be good, but do you realize that that particular plan is the Office apps online only? Do you ever intend to use Word and Excel on installed product? Because that is missed, right? You need to look at what your use cases are. Now, people are really tired of hearing me say this, and I'm going to say it again anyways, because it's worth saying. One size does not fit all, even within your subscription to Microsoft. Some organizations, even larger organizations, one as early as, or as recent as last week, which was a rather large org, they had several thousand people, their business units and their IT team were kind of baffled when I told them, like, you can enable your floor workers with F licenses, and it is just a few dollars a user a month, and because they're not going to use the Office apps, they're going to use the ones on the web if they have a link or something in an email, but they just need access to SharePoint, and they need access to maybe be able to push a Power App or what have you, and you want to connect them, you want them to be Teams enabled, and you can have frontline worker licensing to do that. Everybody does not need an E5 to accomplish what you want to accomplish. Yeah. So it's a matter of mapping. It's a very it's a discipline and it's an exercise that, it's so easy, even for your friendly neighborhood consultant to say, oh yeah, what is the highest level thing that people need, and say that's what you have across the board. um, I don't subscribe to that. I say, let's take the time to sharpen our pencils and have the project that says, let's figure out what you need, because the cost savings you have by figuring out what you need more than offsets anything you'll ever pay in licensing fees. So, you have to keep in mind that, you can have a blend of things, just making sure that you create a matrix of types of users by role and determining how they map to a specific license type and feature that you need. And it used to be just, do we need Office apps? Do we need mail? Do we need SharePoint? It's more than that now. As you called out, there's security features in a lot of these, especially the business premium. There's a lot of security features inside of these products. And whether you have a separate security suite or not, you still have the ability of coupling some of the reporting for these tools, or putting things in place to keep people from, randomly clicking links that are bad, that maybe corrupt your data, and you get malware or ransomware on your system. By deploying this properly across your org and picking the right license types will save you a lot of headache and probably money in the long run.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think a lot of times we like to direct organizations, if it's their first entry point into the Microsoft 365 realm, as business premium usually is like where the standard, and then
The
we
launch
kind
point.
of, for the pretty good launch point. You sacrifice some stuff on the collaboration piece side and stuff like that, but you get some more security features, like or I guess depending on how you look at it, I with like we talk about e-discovery a lot, but with the business premium you don't necessarily get the e-discovery piece, whereas with different licensing that you would get that. And I think even with, like you said, one size doesn't fit all. I mean, some organizations don't even realize that they could have nonprofit licenses, or even from an education perspective, where there's, which I think it's called A1, A3, A5, I believe, where it's cost less because it's a
It's
college,
academic,
or
right?
college, or university, or even your local grade schools and stuff like that, where they don't have to pay as much, but they get pretty similar features to what the regular licensing would be. So a lot of times, you don't even realize what other options are out there for an organization, depending on what type of org you are.
Yeah, and the other thing, speaking of classification of organization, and this is something that I was just going to bring up in passing, but we'll touch on it here real quick, is if you do work for the government, and like maybe you have ITAR requirements, so there's if you're a supplier for the government, there's GCC and GCC High, there's FedRAMP, there's Azure Gov, there's a lot of accepted solutions that are there, and it's not really something that they're like, hey, when you go to their webpage, hey, look what we have. And it's not like they're hiding it either. It's just not as prevalent that it will show up in your search history, unless you definitely search, you have a definitive Boolean search for that, right? But they do have solutions that cover those. And we're seeing more and more, because of the requirements for security, especially for suppliers that do work for the government, to have these types of tenants and subscriptions, and it has the things to control in there. And I think that's a little more. We're going from like a business IT conversation into an IT security conversation. So I want to kind of steer us back, but there is security things within a standard tenant that will allow you to geo-pin somebody to a specific place to meet your governance requirements. Again, that's another show all unto itself. So let's pull away from 365 a little bit, and let's start talking a little bit about Azure, because this conversation around pricing is really simple to have, but it's complex. So what are the pricing models in Azure? It's free, pay as you go, or a commit, right? So there's things to have in mind when you're picking what you do. So some people, as we mentioned at the top of the show, there's those, and I'm looking at my whiteboard here. There's that enterprise agreement, or maybe an organization has has agreed to commit to a certain amount of spend in Azure. So like they'll have that as a requirement, and they'll get some considerations from pricing for that, right? Um, but some organizations, transact through a CSP, and again, as we mentioned, or MSP, we mentioned that sure they can be managed. The pricing could be, different, and you could see some gains and get some benefits from a CSP or MSP or not, depending on what you're doing. But there's the whole, like, most organizations, they mash the button because they want to get going, or they have a set of developers who are like, hey, try this Azure thing out, and they just stand up a subscription, and they're like, pay as you go. They punch the MX in and off, right? It's worth noting there are other things and other options for you. So if you have an enterprise agreement, or you have some sort of a structured agreement with Microsoft, you can also have the ability to deploy at a fraction of the cost. Like, I think it's somewhere around 25% of the cost, a development subscription. It's extremely affordable for organizations to stand up test resources, or have resources that they need to develop on that they don't want to have, paying full production. So you can have parity between your systems and pay only for what you're using and what are doing for development. As long as it doesn't cross the prod barrier, you're fine. And it's also worth noting that you're paying per second or instance, depending on what the particular service is in Azure. So you can have something like crazy high compute cluster that's costing you $1,800 a day, or something that won't cost you $1,800 in 50 years because it's so affordable. So it's worth mentioning that there's other areas that we can get some pricing breaks based upon our licensing model and pricing. So, I know it's ITPro Talk licensing is the title here, but it kind of, licensing equates to cost, right? Because that's what we're really looking at. We have to justify these things. So Azure has some built-in budgeting and cost things to help you with that. But when you license this out, so even under a pay-as-you-go subscription, there's other considerations other than just having like a dev tenant for an EA. There's things called spot instances. And spot instances are insanely affordable, where certain compute types are able to be stood up, again, at a fraction of a dollar of what its normal cost is, and you're allowed to use it until you get evicted, and you can determine what happens when you get evicted. So the use case for a spot instance is you need to try something out in your subscription, but you don't want to really go full bore on it, but you still need that framework of that box, that configuration. You can tag it as a spot instance, and it's going to find those spare compute cycles to accommodate you until such a time that those spare compute cycles need to be taken up by something that's not a spot instance, something that is a desired, needed, fully paid for solution. And then one of two things happen, and you choose this when you deploy your spot instance. Number one, you can choose it to just like tear it down and shut it off, just preserve the disk off somewhere, pay for the storage until it becomes available again. Or you can have it, spin down to something a little more permanent. Like, you can increase it and say, hey, this can't go away because we just developed it on a spot instance and now it needs to be here. So talk to your friendly neighborhood Azure architect to find out how, how, and why you should do this. I find it very useful when I need to test things out and I don't want to really just like spend $180 to $250 a month on a machine. I just check the box spot instant and just stand it up and work on it, wrench on it. A lot of the times I'll pick spot instances for stuff I'm doing a demo on. I'm just going to throw it away later. Maybe I need to prove something to if I'm a business and I'm not take the consulting lens off. If I'm a business and I need to, prove something to my, maybe my data team, or prove something to my business to say, hey, look how this is what we want to do. And you're going to do a proof of concept. Spot instances are a great way to do it, not having to pay full price. So, if you need certain compute models, you can check that box. So that's super helpful, right? What are some other ways, Dev, that you can think of that we can save some money?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of going back and with those particular use cases that you were talking about are normally around like VMs and stuff like that. I think that another one that people can look at is like burst instances. Not exactly like spot instances where you just get evicted without you knowing, or without your choice. With burst with those burst ones, you can, if you have like a seasonal workload or even like a timely workload as far as like a payroll at the end of the month or
Mother's Day, card companies, flower
yeah
companies. We use
yeah
that scenario all the time.
tax season or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be, where you're really ramping up through like January through April, and then the rest of the year you're kind of low. A lot of those times you can pay. You don't really want to tear it down, but you don't need the capacity where you're running at when you're running during those active time periods. You can sit idle for for whatever the time period is, and then it would accumulate to, I believe,
Bottle it up.
I forget what the verbiage they use. I don't know if it's credits or whatever the case may be, but you accumulate credits while you're idle, and then when you're ready to throttle it up, like you said, you can turn on hit the red button and watch it spin and go up, and for you to accommodate your high capacity.
Yep.
So those are definitely useful as well if you don't want to spend for a full bore machine the entire year or whatever. You can only spend it when you need it. So
Yeah. So you're touching on the next point that is that things called reserved instances.
Yeah.
So that's something that is incredibly useful for organizations. If you and your development team or you and your infrastructure team have figured out some things that are going to be here and they're going to be here for a while, there's an option when you're purchasing the service or when you're adding this or configuring the service to consider it as a reserved instance, and you can do like a 1 or a 3 year reserved instance, and you'll get a significant price break. And mostly reserved instances are on most compute type things because they're pretty predictable. It slips my mind if in the data space there is reserved instances for some of those back-end services, but there is a lot of savings you can get from that. And again, this falls underneath the pay-as-you-go, and or if you decide to reserve it, you're committing to that for a year. I know it's not necessarily a licensing model, but it is a way in which we're transacting services. So keep that in mind. So if there's things that are going to be here and they're not going to go away, and if you have the ability to check it as a reserved instance, you're going to get some deep savings there. One of the other ways in which we can get some savings is through software assurance or license credits, on-premises credits. So some organizations have purchased licenses for on-premises servers, and you have the ability to get some of that credit back if you assign those licenses to cloud workloads. So if you go out there and you do your thing and you're configuring your stuff and you say, okay, well, this used to be servers we had on-prem and we're moving them there, we have this spend, you can offset some of that spend in the form of a reduced price for your cloud services. So that's something to keep in mind too as well. But there is something I want to call out that this is the thing that gets missed a lot. Let's wrap up the topic here with things that are free in Azure. There's a lot of services that are free. Now, mind you, there are restrictions on what you can do with these services, and I don't say that in a negative way. I say that in a positive way. The restrictions are there to make sure that the services don't get abused and just like used for random other hey, here's a whole pile of services, and someone goes and creates a torrent site that uses functions to do all kinds of crazy stuff. But there are things, and I'm looking over here at my screen here because the list is too big. The things I know of, like you can get like 4,000 logic apps actions, event grid 100,000 operations, there's no charge. Kubernetes AKS, so you can deploy and manage containers. They don't charge for that. They charge for the compute beyond that, but you're not going to have to pay for that. Here's the other one that blows people's mind. Cosmos DB, 1,000 request units per second provisioned with a throughput with 25 gig of storage. So if you have a pay-as-you-go account or if you have a regular account and you want to bolt some of these on, the first tier in, there's that free tier of service. So this is twofold, right, for organizations, twofold benefit. Fold number one is, okay, I'm a small org. I really just don't really need to beat up the service that much. I'm just going to put it on this basic or free tier. Or free tier, there's free, basic, then there's the standard. That's kind of the the roll up normally that we see until they change it again. But keep in mind, this is also for larger organizations to figure it out, right? So if you have something you're rolling in there, your month one is not going to be crazy same full price as what your solution is as you are going to deploy, because you can take the time to like work out the kinks in your solution or your service by putting it on that lower tier and then moving it into a tier that is more production production matching, right? So it's going to match what you need, right? Or relevant, I should say. So just doing like the scroll through like Azure DevOps, that's the other one that's huge in my mind. You can have 5 users with unlimited private Git repos. I mean, if you have a small IT team and you're going to do infrastructure as code, Azure DevOps is a great place to land all your infrastructure as code stuff, especially, if you're doing bicep and it's out in Git already, you can marry the two together. Again, don't want to get too geeky on this one, but Azure Advisor, we're just going to skip over that. But like you can do 5 low frequency activities in Azure Data Factory, and they're not really going to give you a massive cost for that. It's like no cost for that. 50 meg of storage for 10,000 hosted documents and 3 indexes per services for Azure Cognitive Search. I mean, that's huge to get things moving when you want to start doing cognitive services, right? The list is just scroll and scroll and scroll of all the different things that are available to you. So like you can get the developer edition of SQL Server 2019 for build test in a non-prod area. So, I mean, that's beauteous. If you need to demonstrate something and figure it out, it's not going to crush your budget. And a lot of organizations go out there and just mash, I need a SQL Server and this is the size I need. And they're just going to wrench on it for like several months. And, they're incurring several hundred to a couple $1,000s a month just on things that are trying to figure it out. So, again, as long as you have either an account if you have the $200 free credit account that you get for sparking a new Azure instance, or if you already have one and you have a pay as you go and there's like a credit card backing it up, if you exceed these things, you're good to go with these types of things. And it's always free in Azure. So, Azure machine learning, that one sticks out. Machine learning is a big topic. We talk about it all the time. You can develop and run R and Python models on your platform, so you can get into that first free tier. And then as you scale and grow, you can burst accordingly.
Yep.
So I think, let's just do a quick recap. We talked here briefly on some of the legacy models of licensing. We discussed, EAs and certain organizations may have some benefits already bundled or some commit that they're committing to. There's a CSP, MSP model for some organizations that, some of them are value driven. You get some extras, usually with a CSP or an MSP. Occasionally there are some challenges. Just know that, when you're reaching out for support, your support is your CSP or your MSP and who transacts that, not Microsoft Direct yet. And then we rolled into some of the M365. I know it was an awful lot. We should have maybe separated it into 2 episodes, but we want to stripe across, the general business so they understand the fear of moving to the cloud and the models that are there are complex. And there are options, and there's a lot of options to save a lot of money. So over at Aspirant on the day job, I know that's a different show they sponsor there, but we have a benefits realization program there that is huge. And I know I do this all the time with, my peers in the space through ITP, where we just kind of go through what you have and do you need that and should you have that, and maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't, maybe you need more, maybe you need less. Let's right size your M365, make sure you're getting the biggest value out of it, and get you using the things that you don't know you have, or you have, you just don't know how to deploy. And the same thing within Azure, Azure Vision, sitting there and figuring out what you intend to do with the cloud and mapping that to the most appropriate resource and doing it in a best practice scalable way is one thing. The other thing is also trying to find ways in which you're cost effective and you're secure at the same time. You're not sacrificing function. You're not sacrificing the safety of your data. You're not sacrificing the security of your people. And having that all bundled up in a way which is sustainable and scalable moving forward. So Kind of on that note, any final words, Mr. Devlin?
No, I think you really covered a lot of it. I think especially when it comes to Azure, that the more you figure out what more you dial in what you're going to use and what you're going to use, the better cost efficiency you'll have. So definitely, like you said, talk to your friendly neighborhood Azure your friendly neighborhood Azure guy, and figure that out, because you'll save yourself a lot of money and headache in the long run. And even with M365, I mean, usually if you want the full tilt tier, you can get the highest licensing, but even like you said, one size doesn't fit all. Some you just get frontline worker licensing for your frontline workers. They don't need the whole gamut of features and stuff like that. To really take a hard, long look at the different types of employees in your org and determine what level of licensing they actually need.
Absolutely agree with everything you said there, sir. So if you need more information, go to ma-itpro.com. We'll direct you to the right resources. As I mentioned earlier, we'll put the links when we rebroadcast this. We'll put links in show notes, as well as the video of this. We'll make sure that we put links in the comments too. We'll comment back after we post this with some of the links that are there. Again, we appreciate you as a listener. We appreciate all the various outlets that we have that are, sponsored, unsponsored. They're all over. Our job is to try to make technology scalable, sustainable, and a way in which you can move forward. And we want to be your resource to go to feel good, safe, secure, and moving in the right direction. So again, we appreciate you, and we look forward to talking to you again on the next IT Pro Talk.